Welcome to Resource Thursday with MSP Alliance. I'm your host, Paco Lebron. This is the place to learn how to run your IT service business, whether you're a one-person shop or leading a team for the journey. This is the place for you. Let me go ahead and introduce my co-host. We have none other than Mr. April, cover model of Channel Pro magazine. We have Rick Smith over at Renactus Technology. Rick, how the heck are you, my friend?
I'm doing good, Paco. Like I say, any better than BSN. Doing great. How about
I
you?
hear that. I hear that. I hear that. Our guest today actually asked me how was I doing, and I had to tell him that with the way the week has been going, it's been nothing but better than good and better than most. So I'm excited to go ahead and have a conversation with him. We will be talking with Charles Weaver, who is the CEO of MSP Alliance, here shortly. But before we go into that, we want to go ahead and speak about our in-person event. Probably your favorite thing too, Rick, which is also in your backyard. What can I be talking about? That is TechCon Unplugged. TechCon
Yes,
Unplugged.
sir.
TechCon Unplugged
Sorry.
will be in Woodbridge, New Jersey, September 7th to the 10th at the Delta Hotels Woodbridge. Join us for an evening mixer on September 7th that evening as we kick off 2.5 days of content to help better your business, save money, save time, and improve your services. And as the show intro has mentioned, this is for any size IT solution provider, whether you're an emerging MSP or a veteran in the space, this is the place for you. Take a look at our website. We are going to be updating that much more frequently now, as we've now entered our second tier of pricing at $299 for tickets. That is going to be until June 30th, Rick. Does that sound
Yes,
about
sir.
right?
Yes,
So
sir.
get your tickets now. Head over to techconunplugged.com and see all the great things. And I hear rumors that an agenda will be coming soon. So keep a lookout and stay up to date. Techconunplugged.com, and we will hope to see you there. All right, Rick. I am super excited to introduce our next guest here. We have none other, as I mentioned in the intro, Charles Weaver over at MSP Alliance. Charles, how are you today?
Fantastic, gentlemen. Good to be here.
Welcome,
Perfect,
welcome.
perfect. Charles, now I know, so MSP Alliance, in my opinion, is a well-known organization. I have been familiar with the organization for many years. But before we go into the organization, kind of what MSP Alliance does, why don't you give us a little bit of an intro of yourself and kind of how you came into the space and found MSP Alliance?
Yeah, thank you. So I came at it a bit unusually. I came at it through the what used to be called the application service provider sector, ASP, which is now we call SaaS or application managed services. But back in the day, I worked for a .com kind of a news and analyst group, and my background's in law, so I was not a technician other than what I like to do and what I studied programming when I was in grade school. So I got a flavor and a desire and an interest in tech from a very early age, but I wasn't professionally trained in it. And but when I was going through law school, it was a pretty eye-opening thing for me to realize how much missing there was from the policy, from the legal side around technology. And that was in the 90s, and the .com boom was just getting started, and it was just about to hit fever pitch. And so from that, I got introduced to a handful of early stage MSPs in the mid to late 90s, and realized really quickly that they had no place to come and talk about what they were doing. Now, you guys understand this. There's always a need to talk about what you do, how you do it, and just to share with your colleagues. Imagine 20 plus years ago, it was even worse, right? There weren't conferences, there weren't websites, there weren't podcasts like this. It was a desert, right? And so that was the genesis of MSP Alliance, and getting to these early stage MSP executives who said, look, we need something that's ours and ours alone. And that's what got me into it.
Very cool, very cool. Now, as far as when MSP Alliance started, around what year was that?
2000.
2000.
Around
Yep.
2000.
So it's funny that you say that because back in 2000, I've heard the same stories, and it was only like a handful, if not maybe on the count of one hand, of where you can get resources, let alone a dedicated resource that kind of encompassed everything, even down to when we started our journey here around 2010, 11 or so. It was even scarce then, 10 years later. and trying to find something. And I think the better thing to say was that we just didn't know what we didn't know, and we were in just secluded silo mindset of, I know what I know because I've done it, I've had the experience, and not understanding that there's an ability and a mind dump elsewhere of all this brain trust of information to really collaborate and understand. And I go and I say this all the time, where I found a podcast network around that time frame, around 2014 actually, and I had told myself, of the 14 years that I had been in tech, I learned more in those 6 months of finding that network and collaborating than the previous decade that I've been doing it, because either A, I was doing it wrong, which was a definite wrong, it wasn't an opinion, it was a definitely fact, or there were better ways to do it. Rick, I know that you have had a similar experience when finding a community and being able to collaborate and help improve your business. What's your thoughts on what Charles just said, as far as kind of that scarcity back then to kind of what was the need?
Right, because I think about it. I started my business in 2003, and what I knew from the corporate side and what I learned myself, right? And I went essentially 7 to 9 years on my own without those resources. And then when I found the communities and found out they existed, it was like, whew, the floodgates open. It was like what we seriously call a data dump, right? So you got all of this knowledge, and it's like you said, you did realize you were doing some things wrong. I realized it was, there was so much more it was so much that I did not know. And that's the thing. And that's what community and resources bring you, is because you learn, if you're open-minded to you. I learned quickly. I would say between 2011 and, I'm still doing it now, but 2011 is really around the time where the floodgates open, and I got a little bit of knowledge. And then 14, 15 is when it really, really hit. So that's very important. And it also shows my age.
Well, think about this. The startup MSP today has so many advantages for that exact reason that you mentioned, Rick. And compared to the startup in the late 90s, the early 2000s, well, like you, again, we had to make it up, right? Those MSPs had to make it up as they went along, literally. There were no policies. There were no best practices. They were making that up through trial and error, sharing with their colleagues and having their colleagues tell them, "Oh, that's crazy, that's dumb," or "No, actually, I've been doing the same thing." And like you said, it's an eye-opening experience. So,
no, absolutely. So, Charles, why don't we talk a little bit about MSP Alliance and how, obviously, we've talked when it started, kind of what its purpose and what was its driven mission for. But why don't you talk to us about what the organization does today? I know that there's a plethora of things that that the organization does, but I'm curious to hear kind of what, in your words, some of the highlights of what it can do to help those that are maybe listening today.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the question. The mandate has not changed in 23 years. So our purpose, our reason for being, is to advance the cause of the professional managed services community. Guys like you, right? Of every size, right? And they're not all, a few person shops. They're not all 50-person shops. There's some, very big multinational, kind of juggernaut MSP groups out there that are members. If you're an MSP company or you're a division of a larger company that happens to do managed services, there's a place for you at MSP Alliance. Our goal in that regard hasn't changed, as I said. Today, what we spend the majority of our time doing is really around a handful of areas that I think are very closely related. Number one, it's fending off regulatory misconceptions about what it is that you guys do. There's a lot of it, right? I mean, think of just within our community, there's a lot of variance and flexibility about, hey, how do we do certain things? Imagine you're outside the tech sector, outside the channel, outside managed services land. Those folks have a very different view of who you are and what you do. And it's not always good. Most of it's good. Don't get me wrong. Most of it is really, really good. But there's a handful of folks that want to, blame. It's the human condition to want to blame others for problems that are not necessarily, can be blamed on any one person or organization or sector. And so people want to act on that, and they want to pass, in my opinion, silly laws that would make it ultimately harder for MSPs to operate and to help their customers. That is certainly one thing that we spend a good amount of time doing today. That shapes out in areas like insurance, cyber insurance, and some of the policies that are coming out from that sector. We're doing a lot of work to try to bring clarity and transparency and understanding to the cybersecurity underwriting community worldwide about what it is that MSPs really do for their customers and why you guys are so important to the cybersecurity ecosystem. We talk a lot to regulators, policy makers, people who write laws. We worked a lot with the folks down in Louisiana when they came out with their MSP registration law, trying to get them to understand. We understand why you're wanting to act, but please understand that this may have an impact that you don't foresee, and trying to educate them on things like that. And then lastly, certification is a large area that we spend our time on globally, just certifying MSPs of all sizes to try to help them communicate their compliance status, trying to communicate what they do downstream to their customers so that they can have greater assurance and rest easy at night that their MSP actually knows what they're doing. So that's kind of the core of what we do today.
Gotcha. Now, as far as how you are helping with that education piece, and really on both sides, one to the MSPs, but also those that are affecting MSPs, whether it's regulators, whether it's as you mentioned, the cyber insurance underwriting, what made you think of going that route and helping in that education piece, but B, why did you feel that you all needed to do it versus maybe someone else in a well-known organization that hopefully could step up and kind of do it? Was it a matter of no one was really doing it and someone had to, and you guys felt that you were the best fit to do so? Or was it something where it just evolved in conversations and it was something you adopted to really go all in on?
So excellent question. My answer involves 2 points in time in the past. The first one was in 2004. The MSPs in the group, much smaller. I mean, we're over 30,000 members today. In 2004, we might have been a couple hundred. Okay. Very, very different time. But back then, that group said, we want our own standard. It was something that they brought to us. If I recall, I had to be convinced, right? Because I said, man, do you guys know what you're going to do? This is not like you just, spend a weekend, with a six pack and try to write up a standard. Right. It took the better part of a year to come up with that. So that was the first inflection point where I realized the MSPs wanted a standard that was their own, that they created, that was reflective of what they were learning, even as Rick mentioned, right back in 2003, 2004, there were some early stage MSPs who had been in it already for a number of years and felt, hey, we have a good understanding that we want to start documenting some of our best practices. That was number one. Number two was in 2007, and that was after the standard had been written. We realized that there was a big gap in insurance. And that was that what we typically call E&O, errors and omissions, was noticeably absent in any type of cyber or, and not to get too technical, but basically remote attacks, right? Things that would happen in a different country, but impacted you as an MSP in Dallas, Texas, or in Chicago or in LA, were being disclaimed because the policies weren't written that way to protect you, the MSP, or your customers. And so we noticed that was a gap, and nobody else was talking about this. So we stepped in and we went to Lloyd's of London and a few other groups and said, we want to correct this. And we did. And we came up with the first MSP specific insurance. And from that point onwards, we have been, just evolving the education component, trying to get the people that underwrite policies for MSP organizations understand what it is that you do, why you're important, what is valid for them to look at, what is not going to be valid for them to look at or assess in the underwriting process and stuff like that.
Gotcha. Now, when going to these insurance providers, I think that, for respect, you went with Lloyd's, right? And they're one of the largest, if not the largest insurance provider in our space. How did that conversation, I guess, go? Because I think it's a matter of trying to say, hey, look, we want to educate you, but kind of to say you're not doing it properly. Let us help you, right? Like, how is that
That ain't right.
right? How is that receptive of? Because the reason why I asked that is because I think the story we hear now is that the entire insurance industry just doesn't know what to do with our industry, and they're trying to figure it out as they kind of go. There's some that are like, well, we haven't any incidents, so we're going to keep it at a moderate policy, whereas some got taken to the cleaners and they're like, well, we gotta make up 3 times X because our portfolio is just not helping us. I'm just curious as to how that conversation was receptive, or if it was a lot of massaging and attempts to try and hopefully get a cordial conversation. Because I think with anybody in general, human nature is, you can't tell me what I'm not doing right, etc. How was that whole process, out of curiosity?
It was hard.
Yeah.
And you are absolutely right that as difficult as it was back in 2007 when we started talking to them, it's even more difficult today because, and I want to get into it, it's a big issue, it's an important issue, and there's a lot of sides to it, and I don't want to be unfair to any one side, but there are, I don't know if you gentlemen remember a handful of years before pandemic, so maybe 2018, 2019, there was a series of fairly well-known ransomware attacks that hit, quote unquote, I'm using, for those of you in the audio only can't, I'm using air quotes, MSPs that were involved. And there were, there's a lot of downstream customers, a lot in medical, some in government, who were impacted. Mm-hmm. And I'm just going to ask you to take my word for it, because we looked at the data, we had access to claims information, not only from ours, but other areas that we were getting, people were feeding us information and telling us these were not MSPs. These were not MSPs causing these problems. And that was the first time that I really realized we got a problem. We have a massive problem of these underwriters and these agents thinking that they're underwriting an MSP, and they're not. And the good MSPs like you guys are I hate to say it, but you're paying for the mistake of an uninformed insurance professional, kind of applying what you guys do to someone who doesn't do what you do. And I'm speaking in generalities, but that's a very big issue that requires an educational response. And I think we're getting there. I think that the underwriters, the agents out in the street that are working directly with the MSPs are starting to pick that up. By the way, this is also happening to your customers, right? They also want cyber now coverage. Yeah. And who are they going to fill out those cyber forms? They give it to their MSP to answer those questions. Now, how's this for a blow your top Thursday? The same industry that looks at MSPs and says they're high risk, we can't underwrite them, are getting cyber insurance policy applications filled out by the same MSP for their customer, and they're taking that as granted. How's that for?
Yep. And those people are charged with making sure that those same MSPs are charged with making sure that it all works right too.
You can't have it both ways. That's all I'm saying. So, No, insurance has definitely been, cyber insurance specifically has been definitely a highlight over the last several years. I think me and Rick, you and I were just speaking about it the other day on how it's just amazing on the misinformation that our clients have, that we are responsible for X, whether that is for their compliance, their regulatory risk, things of that nature. It's like, well, of that entire thing, it's really this small tech part is where we're responsible for it. So we can help you, but we're not responsible for you. And I think that's where that whole shared responsibility piece comes into play and things of that nature. But Rick, what is your thoughts on kind of hearing what Charles had just mentioned and the fact of cyber insurance is definitely a conversation that still needs to be had.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say two things. We know that there's some insurance companies who've stepped out of the cyber insurance market altogether, and those are the ones, I guess, who've just went at it with basically, as Charles is saying, it went over here. They thought they were doing it right, realized it just cost them money. They said, screw it. And then there are those now, and I think now I'm no insurance professional, but it seems like there's an overcorrection now, and that is coming with the skyrocketing cost of cyber insurance. Right now, we got to recoup what we've lost. But I am one of those who is a proponent of cyber insurance, and I say that for this reason. We fight. It is another tool in our toolbox as an MSP to help us, bring a client to that standard where we believe they should be, to protect them, to secure them, and so having just another push coming from a different direction that is not, it's not from me, and some who are short-sighted think I'm only pushing additional stuff to make additional revenue. It's coming from a different source that helps to reinforce the same argument, the same principles that we've been talking about. So I am a big proponent of cyber insurance. I'll be glad when it, I guess, I don't know if plateaus the word or matures enough to the point where we get to that point and then things start, bringing themselves down, because right now it's a challenge for a lot of people, even customers now, to get cyber insurance, and it can't be that way. We can't have it both ways.
Yep, exactly. Now, kind of steering course, I want to drive back on the organization MSP Alliance. Charles, I know that you mentioned members, right? And you're at 30,000 members now, and you are a membership based entity. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about, what does it take to get involved with MSP Alliance? Is it as simple as going to the website, signing up as a member, and then there's an experience right after? Can you tell us a little bit more about those that are intrigued and want to know a little bit more about what MSP Alliance can help them with the resources that are available?
Yeah. So for those MSPs today, lucky enough to be around applying for membership today, you don't have to pay the membership dues back in 2000, which were, I think, $5,000 per company per year. So those are .com prices. So those are gone. We actually, yeah. So you have to be a practicing MSP. You fill out an application online. We do check into it. We do validate that you're actually a real person working for a real MSP. But after you get in there, there's a lot of resources. We do have an insurance program. It's not compulsory. You have access to it if you want it. There's a lot of material in terms of educational material, data that we collect throughout a variety of different sources that just is more operational data, I would call it. Not necessarily research, but actual operational data from real MSPs that we feed back, all anonymized, just to give other operators and owners like yourselves additional, resource and guidance on what the rest of the community is doing. And then we have optional, again, other programs like certification, and in general involvement, I would say is, I heard this said many times to people who, when I asked them, what do you get out of belonging to us, to MSP Alliance? And they would say, well, it's you get out of it what you put into it. And there are members who are more on the passive side, and that's fine. They have very specific reasons why they joined. Maybe it was just to get insurance. Maybe it was just to get certified. I accept that. But then there are other members who are more active, and they want to be more active, and they want to be more on the, I would say, helping out with policy issues. And there's plenty of opportunity for that to happen with us. And I would say that we do have a good, strong core group of people worldwide who care about that and want to be participating in that. So we're pretty fortunate with the members that we do have, and we get a lot done with their help.
Very cool, very cool. And then I know that from looking at the website, and I guess I didn't put two and two together, you also have an event that you all throw as well. Is that the MSP World?
MSP World is the longest, one of the longest standing MSP conferences. Obviously, we took a pause in the pandemic,
sure,
during COVID, but yeah, we started back in 2002. So yeah, well, we do that. We have, they don't like to call themselves a peer group, but they're a network of senior MSP executives that get together and they talk and they, it's more of a club or a network where they don't share financials, but they get together and just discuss meaningful issues that operators and owners really care about. And so that's been picking up steam lately. So yeah, we have a balance of community, of in-person events, online education, certification, insurance, and just generally trying to get the rest of the world to understand why the world needs more MSPs.
Very cool. One last thing I wanted to touch on, and for those that don't know, you also host a podcast as well, which is MSP Zone. And so I know about the podcast because my director of IT operations always sends me episodes on, and it's been a while since I've caught up with your show, but he always sends the episodes because he feels that your show is one of the few that really get down to the actual information. Others may have like a gimmick or a way of trying to attract to their show. You're actually just there to provide the information. It's straight through, it's concise, it's understandable, and he loves that. And that's why he's a faithful listener. So he always tends to send me a lot of those episodes on points of either that he's trying to make that we go back and forth on, or just more of a noodle scratcher on because you do come up with a lot of topics. I think there was one where you mentioned where the whole one of the big RMM companies obviously that had got compromised, and like, are we in an era that we need RMM and why, and do we need an MSP? And so there were things like that, just kind of really discussing both sides of the house and having that information. Can you tell us a little bit about how the podcast came to be and the release schedule for it?
Yeah, so we had done a podcast pre-pandemic. I kind of gave it up because it wasn't really fashionable, or maybe I just didn't hit the stride, and I just didn't feel like I was probably just too busy to really do it. And then the world shut down, and I was twiddling my thumbs one day, and I said, I better figure out something to occupy some time, which is probably something we all did. Yeah. And I just started doing it and started bringing on some guests, and not all of them have a guest, but it was just more just talking about things that were happening and relaying. What I was trying to do was relay to the broader community, whoever was listening at that time, which turns out to be a lot more than I thought it was, just what I was hearing from conversations from people who were legitimately scared and concerned and, worried about, the industry, worried about what the world, and it was repackaging a lot of that and pushing it out there to try to give some sense of hope to MSPs that were, in that situation. Today, so it comes out weekly now, is our cadence, and we try to just reflect on things that are not being talked about elsewhere. And I don't want to say it's the unpopular topics. It's maybe the more uncomfortable topics that I feel we have to talk about, that, even some MSPs say, well, geez, we shouldn't be talking about this stuff. And I'm one of the biggest cheerleaders of the MSP cause that you can find. I've dedicated, a good portion of my life to the managed services profession. I believe in it. I believe in what you guys do. And part of that is also just educating the rest of the world outside the channel, so they get a glimpse of what it is that you do, why you are so important. And if we can accomplish that, that's a good thing.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, I really appreciate you taking out the time this morning to talk to us a little bit about the organization, what you all are doing over there. Again, big proponents of what you all are doing, especially with what everything you got going on. Rick, any lasting thoughts before we kind of round out the show there?
Well, again, I do want to thank you, Charles, for your time today. And it's funny, I was going to say early before Paco mentioned the podcast, if anyone notices that voice, because it's a very distinctive voice. And I listen to I listen to a lot of podcasts, and I listen to your podcast when I'm on my morning walk. I would love to say morning run, but it's actually my morning walk. So, that's how I catch up with everything. But I do, again, want to thank you for what you're doing for the community. And we will, for everyone, we will put some links in the show notes for MSP Zone and for MSP Alliance. And I would encourage all of our listeners. It's I say this again, like the community is what keeps us afloat, right? We learn from each other, we grow from each other. So as best we can, we should support each other. And what you guys are doing at MSP Alliance is that. And I encourage everyone, be involved. You will definitely get to learn some things from from any of the groups that you didn't know were going on. And a lot of these issues are really dependent on our survival as a group, as the MSP faction or whatever we want to call ourselves. But so we have to be involved at some point, just to learn, just to educate ourselves. So again, Charles, I just wanted I always appreciate people who give back to the community. So I just want to thank you for that and acknowledge it.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
And with that, Charles, if anyone wanted to reach out, maybe to either talk to you or know more about the MSP Alliance, what's the best way for them to get involved / reach out?
The website, mspalliance.com. They can chat with us. They can email us, call us. That's probably the best starting place, is just to head to the website, look around, see what's of interest, what do you need, and start the conversation that way.
Perfect. Well, again, Charles, I really appreciate you taking out the time this morning to talk to us about MSP Alliance. And thank you for listening. Tune in every Tuesday and Thursday. Watch the video podcast on youtube.com/MSP Unplugged. Like, subscribe, hit that notification button to be notified whenever a new episode is available. You can also take us with you on the go on your favorite podcatcher app. We're on Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, and on Spotify. And most importantly, if you love what you hear, please leave a review on your favorite podcatcher app as well. Thank you for listening, and we will see you next time on MSP Unplugged.